Hello. Just gonna get started. Hope your December's going well. Chapter 4. Ariel and the Ants. Ariel wandered the city alone. Bored of the discussion between Derek and Lucius, she had discovered she cared little about the robotic reasoning behind the building's creation. She had seen it and been moved by it, and that was enough for her. I guess this puts me in the "I know what I like" category, she had observed as she slipped away into an alley. It was a few moments later, as she walked beside a large canal, currently dry since it hadn't rained for days, when the strange thing started happening again to her mind. Well, not to her mind exactly, she decided upon further consideration, but to her mind's eye. She never had any doubt about who she was or what her real circumstances were, but nevertheless she saw menacing shadows flickering between the buildings beyond, in places so dark she shouldn't have been able to distinguish shades in the first place. And the shadows were flickering toward her. They reached out with long, two-dimensional fingers across the conduit and disappeared in the lights on the sidewalk. The street lamps switched on and off, matching her progress. She was constantly bathed in light, forever beyond the grasping fingers reached, yet she was always walking toward the darkness where the danger was. Early wasn't sure how she felt about that. It certainly aggravated her sense of insecurity. On Aurora, the existence of a solid building had been a dependable thing. Change there happened rarely and gradually. And her life since she had been exiled from Aurora presented her with a decided contrast. Like Derek and his Shakespeare, she'd been doing a little reading on her own lately, on subjects of her own choosing. In a book of settler aphorisms she'd read an ancient curse: "May you live in interesting times." Well, interesting times were what she'd wished for all those years in Aurora, where something moderately interesting happened once a year if you were lucky. From her earliest memory she had yearned to break free of the boredom and sterility. And now that she had succeeded beyond her wildest expectations, she wished for nothing more than a little peace and quiet, for nothing more than a period of flat-out boredom, where she had nothing to do and no one to worry about, not even herself. Thanks in part to the disease ravaging her, she was finding it difficult to know just how to act and what to do, a problem she'd never had on Aurora, where customs and ethics provided a guide for virtually every social situation. She imagined herself not in a robot city, but in the fields of Aurora, walking at night, alone but not alone, followed by unseen loyal robots who would ensure, to the best of their abilities, that she would not come to harm. Instead of buildings closing in around her, there were expansive open fields of trees and grass, plains whose inconsistency was broken only by occasional buildings of a familiar, safer architectural style. The clouds above inspired thoughts of the tremendous Auroran storms, when the thunder rumbled like earthquakes and the lightning exploded from the sky in the shape of tridents. During such storms, the rain flowed as if a dike in the sky had been punctured. The rainfall drenched the fields, cleansed the trees, and she could walk in it and feel it pounding against her all day if she liked. Well, at least until her unseen robots would fear she might catch a cold and insist she seek shelter. Here the rain only inspired the gutters to overflow. Here the rain could be a harbinger of death and destruction, rather than of life. "Now where's Derek?" she suddenly thought, "now that I need him? Oh, that's right, talking to Lucius. It's just like him, to be so self-absorbed in things that don't matter, when he should be trying to find some way for us to get off this crazy planet. Doesn't he understand how badly we both need help? Him for his amnesia, me for my madness." Madness? Was that what it was? Wasn't there some other word she could use for it? An abnormality or aberration? Psychoneurosis? A manic depressive state? Melancholia? Where were the fields, she thought? They had been here just a few moments ago. Where had these buildings come from? Were the fields behind them? She ran around the buildings to take a look. There were only more buildings, extending as far as she could see until they merged into a flattened horizon, a wall of blackness, more shadows. She shook her head, and a few mental mists dissipated long enough for her to remember that there was no fields on this planet, that they had just been desolate rock here before the city had arrived. A city that grew and evolved just like life. A new kind of life. She was like a microorganism here, a germ or a virus, standing in the middle of a creature that only let her live because of a few wires and a few bytes of binary information. Her throat itched. She rubbed her neck. Was she becoming sick? If she was, would a robot notice and medicate her? Would the medicine cloud her thinking even more? If it did, would that be a good thing or a bad thing? Her elbow itched. She scratched it, the effect of her sharp fingernail somewhat muted by her suit. The itch stayed. She stopped scratching. Maybe it would go away if she ignored it. It didn't. It got worse. She tried hard not to think about it, but the sole result was another itching. On her chest. She scratched her breastbone. That itch, too, remained. Neither showed the slightest sign of diminishing. Where was Derek? She wondered as her fear of losing control aggravated her sense of helplessness, which in turn aggravated her fear of losing control. Oh, that's right. He's still with the robot. Hey, I'm all right. I know where I am. I was somewhere else a few seconds ago and I couldn't get back. Come to think of it, is there some place else I should be rather than here? Shouldn't I be in the future somewhere? Then she tried to think of her name, and discovered she could not remember that either. A name seemed like such a basic thing to forget, nor did it seem that far away. But it wasn't where it was supposed to be, uppermost in her mind where she could find it whenever she wanted. It was buried in her pathways. Pathways. Robots had pathways. Was she very much like them? Was she still alone? If she wasn't, would that make any difference? She felt her mind was made up of discarded scraps of ideas and impressions that long ago, maybe, had made sense. Right now they just made a junk heap. She sat down, trying to focus her thoughts and her vision. Without realizing it, she had walked all the way to the reservoir. An ecological system had been created, but not nurtured, by Dr. Avery. A world that had been left alone to create itself. She pondered the edible plants growing on the banks. A clear-cut case of evolution in action. Had Dr. Avery envisioned that possibility? What if other meta-life forms were evolving as well? Now her stomach and crotch itched. Painfully, her skin felt like it was burning from spilled acid. She buried her head in her hands, her temples throbbed, and she feared every artery in her brain was about to burst. It was easy, all too easy, for her to imagine a hemorrhage, the blood seeping everywhere, destroying her involuntary processes, drowning her thoughts. Had she really wanted to be alone? Where was Derek? Oh, that's right. She realized there was a difference, normally a barely perceptible one, but in her heightened case very distinct, between believing you were alone and actually being alone. Dawn was coming to Robot City. The glow Lucius had created was diminishing rapidly as the sun came back and the waves of the reservoir rippled with regular flickers reflecting the rays. Rays that brought life. Ariel watched in fascination as the pebbles at her feet shifted and made way for a gray stalk that, within a matter of moments, twisted from the earth and unfolded two tiny leaves. She accidentally grazed the edge of a leaf, felt the sudden flash of pain on her finger. The wound was narrow like a paper cut. A bubble of blood seeped from her skin. Damn, that smarts, she thought, watching as other stalks unfurled, twisting from the gravel. Her head continued to ache. She stood and staggered to a boulder and leaned against it, being careful not to crush any of the stalks beneath her feet. But it was hard to keep thinking of it, even when she was no longer moving. Hard to keep her mind on things, to remember. Her skin itched all over now in waves that cascaded up and down as if she was being inundated by invisible radiation. She perspired, she shivered, she moaned. She leaned back, looking at the sky, at the billowing clouds. She opened her mouth wide and breathed deeply, trying to keep her mind clear. For the pervasive itch had begun to resemble something, a half-tickle, half-pinprick that brought back the memory of a walk on Aurora, when she had sat down to rest and had felt something similar, only subtler, tinier. She looked down to see an ant crawling up her bare leg. She had shrieked from the surprise of it, but had brushed it off before her concerned robots could reach her. The effect had been unsettling, to be so rudely touched by a mindless life form that could be carrying who knows what form of infectious disease. She had instantly intellectualized the experience, of course. She had long ago decided the horror and fear of disease had been taken to ridiculous extremes. Even so, an involuntary sense of revulsion and disgust at the experience, much greater than was warranted, overtook her. It had lingered until she had bathed in a whirlpool of disinfectants. That night she dreamed of being swarmed by thousands of ants. The nightmare had been similar to what she was experiencing now. But the current feeling was much more vivid. She tried to convince herself that it wasn't real, that neither she nor Derek had detected any form of a metallic insect life on this planet. However, the robots had shown definite signs of intellectual evolution. Perhaps that meant the cells forming the city were capable of random mutation, which meant it was not unreasonable to assume that a form of insect life was capable of developing. Ariel was frozen to the spot with fear. She lowered her gaze, fully expecting to see a horde of ants swarming about her legs, moving up her boots and disappearing into her trouser legs, searching for just the right spot to stop and begin gorging themselves before they start carrying away tiny pieces of her. But when she closed her eyes, it was all too easy for her to imagine the ants, with their big, compound eyes glistening like tin in the sunlight, with their piston-driven, spindly legs and their nuclear battery-powered thoraxes, and especially the steady, mechanical motions of their mandibles, searching over her epidermis like the rods of a Geiger counter. She could not as yet feel the mandibles biting and tearing, but she was certain the pain would come, beginning at any second. Where were the robots when you needed them? Couldn't any see her? Weren't any around? No, of course they're not, she realized with an ever-sinking sense of futility. You're at a reservoir, and they're all in the city, pining about how there aren't any humans around for them to take care of. There's soon going to be one less. Oh, Derek, where are you? Why can't you help me? Ariel was afraid to breathe. She thought that, perhaps if she remained utterly stationary, like one who was dead, then the ants might think she was nothing but a dead rock. But how could she remain motionless for long without breathing? Wouldn't the ants hear the sound of air moving in and out of her lungs? What did it matter? She had to do something, even if it was nothing. She felt the mechanical ants everywhere, crawling up her breasts, nestling in her armpits, inspecting her hair. Why didn't they start eating? Weren't they hungry? What kind of ants were they? The robot ants, she thought. Maybe they're trying to see if I'm a human. If they decide I am, they might not hurt me. If they decide otherwise. Now she knew why primitive man had worshipped deities, to stave off the tremendous fear of the last moments of life, when there were profound good-byes to be said and resolutions to be imparted, but no one to tell them to, and no time left to tell them. "Ariel?" someone whispered timidly. "Are you asleep?" Ariel's eyes could not have opened wider or faster if she had received an electrical shock. She jumped back in stunned surprise at the sight of Woolruff squatting directly in front of her, and promptly smacked her head against the boulder. Things got woozy as the canine cocked her head. Woolruff held a clump of stalks in her left hand, and a few strands hung from the fur surrounding her lips. "Are you well?" "Of course I'm well. What does it look like?" "My ancestors would have said you had a visitor." "Ooh? What kind?" Ariel snapped. She closed her mouth with a force of will, then tried to compose herself. She was only partially successful. "It should be obvious that until you showed up I was the only one here." "Two responses. First, been watching you all night." "What?" "Mandelbrot requested it. Thought you wouldn't appreciate robot." "Why, that big hunk of—" "Please, let me finish. Second, ancestors would have said you weren't only thing in your mind at the moment, and I waited, watching, thinking it would be best not to disturb you or your visitor." "And what exactly made you decide to interrupt my strange interlude?" "You looked like you were about to faint." "I see." Woolruff tipped back further on her haunches so that her back was perfectly straight. Her posture struck Ariel as being almost humanly annoyed, especially when the caninoid crossed her arms and shook her head, as if in disappointment. She went to great lengths to avoid looking directly into Ariel's eyes, first examining the buildings, the bank, the rocks, and then pointedly turning her head back to Ariel, perhaps to have a better view of the reservoir. "Well, aren't you going to ask me what my problem was?" said Ariel. Woolruff turned her head slightly. "Why should I?" "I thought you must want to know, that's all." "None of my business. Not people's way. Definitely not mine." "Aren't you worried?" "No." "Don't you care?" "Didn't have to watch you all night. Was mightily bored. Many times distracted. Could have left you at any time in Mandelbrot neither known nor cared." Ariel suddenly felt as tired as she had been in her life. Even to shrug with a labored air of nonchalance cost her a tremendous effort. "How flattering," she said sarcastically. She immediately regretted the words. Woolruff was stopping just short of saying she had stayed to watch because she was concerned for her welfare. "There you go, Miss Progress," Ariel thought. "You really will go insane if you can't recognize the good in people, whether they're human or not." She sat down beside Woolruff and said, "I'm sorry. Please try to understand that in addition to all our other problems, my mental condition gets out of hand sometimes." "That's all right." "It isn't. It's just that I don't know what I can do about it right now. To make things worse, it always gives me an excuse to misbehave, even if I don't know at the time that's all that is." Woolruff pulled her lips back against her teeth in a kind of smile. "So you are well?" "I'm better." "There's no reason for you to be upset about visits from Trickster. It's how he makes us obey his will, by making us see what he wants." "That may be easy for your race to accept, but we humans aren't so used to having strange beings make pit stops in our minds at their every convenience." Woolruff nodded thoughtfully. "You simply lack perspective." Ariel nodded in return. She had half expected that, as a result of her apology, she would feel the haze of exhaustion lift, but instead she imagined each individual cell in her body deteriorating steadily. A little while longer and she'd have been a quivering mass of protoplasm. "There's an old spacer saying that says everybody likes to feel in control of their lives, but for Aurorans it's only more so," she said. "And why not? It's not only a effect of our current culture, but an extension of our own history. As the first spacers, we terraformed Aurora to suit our own tastes and purposes. We did everything we could to make our new planet a garden. We even brought with us the prettiest, best, and most useful Terran species, leaving behind the ones that would make our life too unpleasant." "If that's your planet's history, then the individual reflects it." "Yes. Until I was exiled and cut off from my funds, I had a great deal of independence. Within socially acceptable limits, which I never really accepted anyway, I had complete freedom of action." "You broke those limits?" "And lost control of my life. Funny how the details of my rebellion are so fuzzy now. Must be a side effect of my disease. Anyway, it's funny how the one thing I was always thought I still had perfect control over, my mind, seems to be slipping away from me now."
Try to relax. Take it from one who has seen many your throws of Vistor. You can't not control it, you deflect it."
Ariel couldn't help but laugh. "You mean that when insanity is inevitable, relax and enjoy it?"
Not insanity. Merely give in to more compelling functions. Derek does that. That is why he has so many ideas."
"I wish I could believe the same thing was true of me." Ariel paused as the implications of Woolruff's remark began to sink in. "Is that what he's doing when he spends so much time with Lucius, when he should be figuring out a way to get off this hellhole?" Suddenly Ariel stiffened. Her eyes went wide.
"What is it?" Woolruff asked. "What's wrong?"
I don't know, she replied. Another vision? I hope so. She grimaced, closed her eyes, and turned her head to the sky. It's not real, she told herself. It's only something I'm imagining. But if reality is something we make, how do we deal with the forces making us? But although she knew on one level that her neurological responses were going awry, her physical self nonetheless continued to respond realistically to the sensation of a distinct something, large and six-legged, distinctively within her life suit. A familiar something. There was only one this time, but it was bigger than she remembered. Much bigger. It was crawling up her stomach. She forced herself to open her eyes, fully expecting to see her suit clinging non-normally to her torso. Then she saw, with a vividness she could not help but decide was absolutely real, the outline of a giant metallic ant moving beneath her suit. The cold touch of its 6 legs, each pressing delicately against her skin, sent chills of terror through her fragile eggshell mind. The outline moved distinctly, delicately forward. She felt the cold brush of a mandible against her left breast, and watched in abject fear as the forefront of the outline moved to her right breast, and rested on it. Ariel screamed at the top of her lungs and ran headlong in the direction she happened to be facing. She was vaguely aware of Woolruff yelling behind her, but she was too busy to pay attention. She did not know where she was running, only that she had to make a bee-line there. She jumped into the reservoir. She was in it for several moments, stunned senseless by the ice-cold water, before she actually remembered diving in. Frantically she tore open the snaps and buttons and zippers of her suit and put her hand inside, rummaging about, searching for the insect so she could pull the sucker out and drown it. But she found nothing. When it came to her ambition for revenge, this was a disappointing development. How she had anticipated seeing it squirm as it tried to get away from her in the water. But on another level she was tremendously revealed. Insanity she could deal with. Physical pain was definitely a cause for panic. Ariel imagined that, perhaps, the ant had been real after all, and had just torn through the suit on the way out. But the water around her, while not exactly clear, was very still. There was no evidence of movement beneath the surface. Even the sand and dirt she'd raised upon entering had settled down by now. She calmed herself with an effort, closed her eyes again, and waited. Soon she felt reasonably assured that the insect wasn't real enough to attack her, but she stayed in the water just to be on the safe side. The water sent pin-pricks of pain cascading through her very marrow, but even that kind of discomfort didn't provide her with enough incentive to get out. Woolruff sat patiently on the bank.
"Are you well again?"
The alien asked. "I think so," she said. "I had another visit."
"Assumed as much."
Think my visitor's gone now. I think I prefer looking at my episodes in terms of visitors, by the way. It's making it easier for me to accept them.
"Good. Don't you want to come out of the water now? You might catch cold."
No, it feels uproarious to be doing something prying robot eyes might disapprove of.
"We'll wait."
Thanks. I'd just be a few more minutes. However safe my mind may feel while I'm here, I don't think my body can take much more of this cold. Something brushed against her. She glanced down to see something had stirred the dirt up. Something too big to be just an ant, something that was real. "What's that?" she exclaimed.
"Was what?"
Woolruff inquired. But Ariel could not bring herself to answer. Her teeth were clattering too much. Screwing up her courage, which she felt was in short supply these days, she gingerly ducked her head beneath the surface, keeping her eyes open in the frigid fluid with an effort. A hunk of metal lay half buried in the bottom of the reservoir. The gentle currents had removed enough of the dirt covering it to begin moving it back to the shore. Its stiff hand brushed again against her leg. Its hand? Ariel accidentally inhaled a noseful of water. She shot up to the surface, sputtering.
"Ariel?"
asked Woolruff.
"What is it?"
"It's a robot! There's a robot down here!"
"What's it doing there?"
asked the Gananoid, running to the edge of the water. I don't know. I think it's dead.
Robots can't die.
Maybe this one can. It looks like Lucius. And thus ends this exciting, compelling chapter. Who's at the bottom of the reservoir? Actually, yeah. Given, yeah. Not sure if it'd be spoiling to tell you, although if you looked at the description for the playlist, I put the background, the summary teaser that's on back of books or inside flap of books. So read that and yeah. Okay. Hope you enjoy.